Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to lecture series on air pollution, sources, effects and mitigation. I hope that you are enjoying the lectures and following as suggested during the end of the presentation or the lectures. So, I strongly again urge you to just follow the instructions, otherwise it will be very difficult for you to come across all the things that are there. So, just be careful with this, study a lecture and then try to understand that, try to read more about this the lecture that has been taught, try to understand the questions and then what could be the possible answers. So, you should also understand and you should make a habit of writing these things. So, that is very important. Okay. Yeah, in this lectures we will be discussing about the road dust emissions. Yesterday we talked about the urban air pollution. So, in urban air pollution, road dust is becoming one of the very prominent source of pollution. It was neglected long back, but because of the increase in the number of vehicles and then the roads, the transportation that is coming from everywhere in the city, especially those bringing the daily use materials like vegetables, and then people traveling all the way from other regions to the city with their personal vehicles. So, that during this transport they bring a huge amount of dust aerosols that is there in the what you call in the tires of the vehicle, and then not only the tires, in the other parts of the vehicle, which during the travel it can be actually brought into the city. So, because of this reason, this is a very big problem and becoming a more challenging, and it's a really very important topic that needs to be discussed. Okay. So, as the title says, that the road dust is actually kind of invisible threat. Okay. So, of course, air pollution itself is an invisible threat because you can't see them. You can only visualize them by the when they have a reduced visibility, but even during very clear days or so called clear days that we have in India, there is a significant amount of aerosols that are present in the atmosphere. So, in those, one of the component is actually dust aerosols, especially we are talking about the urban cities. So, in the previous lectures, like we discussed about the effect of plants and other things, here we will be discussing the other topic of the aerosols, like road dust emissions in the urban city. So, road dust, what is road dust, and we will discuss that what is the difference between road dust and a normal dust. Okay. So, in a actually, just let me see if I have the next slide in this one. Yeah. So, if you see the road dust, natural sources like you can have soil, sands, plants and tree debris. When they die, the tongues becomes open, and from there the dust can be emitted. That is actually plants and tree debris. So, when the tree is exposed and then it is not holding the soil, then that soil is exposed to the atmosphere and that can be a source of dust. Ocean spray, of course, this is actually not much source of dust here, but here you can say that we are talking about the calcium and magnesiums that will be there in the aerosols. So, you have to separate it out, that ocean spray from there. During the wildfire events, these when the fire broke out, the surface becomes very the surface becomes hot, and when the surface becomes hot, the soil loses its gripping capacity. So, it will not be holding that well when the tree is there or the plants are there. So, when they are burnt, actually they are exposed to the environment, especially high temperature, because they have undergone the high temperature burning. So, because of the burning, the surface becomes very hot and then the soil loses its strength. And if you have something like winds, and then these soils can be transported. The other source of the natural source is like weathering of rocks. So, these are the source. So, in general, when we see this one dust is actually like soil and sands that are already there in the atmosphere, that are there in our biospheres, and then these are produced because of the weathering of the rocks. These are not much considered source, but they can be source of dust aerosols in the atmosphere, but they are not very significant compared to the other sources. In comparison to the natural source of dust, you have an anthropogenic source, and anthropogenic source, as I talked about, vehicular emission. When we say, so emission itself is a source, but that is not vehicular emission is not a source of road dust, but during the because of the vehicular transport, the emission of the dust that is actually deposited on the roads and the side of the roads, that becomes very prominent. Then we have also construction and demolition. India is experiencing a huge infrastructure development, and almost every urban cities is going through the huge construction and demolition activities. So, this construction and demolition, they bring a huge amount of dust in the urban areas, and we will see in the next few slides that these dust aerosols, they are confined within the city, they are not transported to the other locations. So, they become a very prominent source. Then some of the industrial processes, like you have to bring loose materials, fuels, and during the transport they bring those materials, and again the tire with the tire and tire wear, because of the friction, they will be generating road dust. Agriculture activity is source of anthropogenic aerosols in this one. Then road surface wear we talked about like the tire wears, and then because of friction between the surface of the tire and the road, the tire will become brittle, and they will be losing some of the organic materials, and when these organic materials mixed with the dust aerosols or road dust, they becomes a part of road dust. And then during the waste management also, because when you are managing your waste, you have to transport your waste from the city to other locations, and if especially during the rainy seasons, if there is a rain, what will happen? Usually the transport sites, they are not very good. Actually, you have concrete road, you don't have concrete road, so you do no concrete roads, and then your vehicles will be traveling through this one. So, they will again kind of bring dust aerosols outside the city to the within the city. So, these are becoming a very important source of the natural dust. So, yeah. So, this, if you just see the definition here, road dust, what is actually road dust? So, road dust is actually mixture of solid particles, tire wear, debris, vehicular emissions, because when vehicular emission is happening, the vehicle emits soot aerosols and carbonaceous materials, then they can be resuspended and deposited surface back on the roads. So, they become again a kind of road dust, and then you have anthropogenic road dust, and they are becoming an emerging environmental health concern. This is very important, especially in the suburban and urban areas. So, relentless digging and tree felling turned James looking into the dust bowl, pushing up air pollution level. There is a story in the newspapers that came that dust pollution, citizens urge BMC to monitor constructions, and this is one of the reasons that almost all the urban cities are going through the construction activities. So, they produce a huge amount of dust aerosols, and not only because of the construction demolition only, the construction of the building itself needs lots of things, because you have to bring bricks there, you have to bring sand, you have to bring what you call cement and other materials. So, these materials are not manufactured, they are brought from somewhere else, and during their transportation pattern they can bring these aerosols. So, with the increased urbanization, there has been an increased construction activities. So, this urbanization has led to increase in the construction activities, okay? And at the same time, road surface deterioration is becoming very important, because you have now so many vehicles are transporting on the road. So, the road surface becomes kind of deteriorate, and this release particulate matter that is actually within the roads on the roads, plus those actually from the tire wear. Okay, so they are actually, and they lead to increase in the dust aerosols and worsening the air quality in the urban area. So this is really very important, and because then of course because of the increased infrastructure construction activities as well as from the higher vehicular traffic. So you have more vehicular traffics, which is sometimes are if you see, they can be idle, so they will be anyway emitting that one. So if you just go and compare the pollutant levels in the roadsides and then in the away from the roadsides, the composition will be very different. Okay. So this is how it looks like. Within the urban city, what you have, there are so many sources of this one. So one source is actually wind blowing, carrying pollutants. They are actually from the transboundary. I mean, say this is the boundary of the urban area. So from away outside the boundary of the urban area, they are bringing the aerosols. The industrial emissions, they are still emitting aerosols that are there, part of this, because they are usually emitted and they are in the higher, little bit up in the atmosphere, maybe say 20 meters or 10 meters to 20 meters or even sometimes higher. So these aerosols can be transported, but part of these aerosols can be of course deposited. So once these aerosols are suspended in the atmosphere, whether they are from the transboundary or the emission within the kind of city itself, they will be keep on resuspension and they will mix with each other. These particles will be trying to mixing with each other, and there will be a kind of pollution loop that will be generated. Resuspension and mixing, they will be again deposited back to the earth on the road dust, and when the vehicles ply, they actually, like you have emissions from the road dust that is there here, and then here you have road dust emissions. So not only the vehicle is polluting, the emission from the tires, you can see here they are coming from these tires, and then they will be very prominent source of this one. So resuspension, this will be again resuspension. So resuspension, mixing, and then settling down. So this is one of the loop that is there, and this loop becomes very important because in the urban areas we don't have very high quality of wind. I mean, not very high quality of wind, not very high wind speed is not there. So the turbulence and eddy currents will be there actually. So they will actually keep on circulating within the urban areas. So they will be giving lots of anthropogenic aerosols. Then you have dust activities, that is from the construction and demolition activities. They produce huge amount of road dust. Usually not road dust, but they are actually huge amount of dust that is there, and once they are deposited, again they will be through vehicle movement, they will be transported to other locations. So construction and demolition, and then transport from the outside, and then industrial process, they contribute significantly to the aerosols. And then of course they are deposited via wet deposition. Once they are deposited, they will be on the roads or on the sides of the roads. And if you just see, I think I have a slide or not, I maybe in the next presentation it is there. So that will be again becoming part of the road dust. So there is actually big confusion about the road dust definition, and if you see the different organizations, they have defined road dust in a different kind of way or different manner. Some of the organizations have taken into account the size of the particles. So for example, International Standard Organization, if you see here, they have defined small solid particle conventionally taken below 75 micron. So now you can imagine a situation that particles that is smaller than 75 micron, they are usually defined as a dust aerosols. You have been listening me in the last lecture that aerosol size is typically 1 to 100 micron. Okay. So this dust actually large enough again that will be actually deposited back, that is true, and most of the road dust, these bigger particles, they are actually suspended and resuspended in the atmosphere during the vehicle movement. So once their vehicle movement, because of the vehicle movement, they will be again, but mind you that it is also very important that when their vehicles are moving or plying on the roads, these small particles, they will get attached to other particles, they will be broken down into the smaller pieces, and then they can become a smaller as small as the, as that they can be suspended in the atmosphere for longer time. So this is very important. So in generally we consider particles with less than 75 micrometer as a urban dust. Okay. And if you see this global glossary of atmospheric chemistry term, so they define like small dry solid particles projected into the air by the natural forces. So any natural forces like winds, volcanic eruptions, and by mechanical made man-made process such as crushing, grinding, milling, and then drilling, drilling and demolition, shoveling, conveying, screening, bagging, and sweeping. So this, for example, this sweeping becomes a very important source, demolition becomes a very important source, grinding, crushing, and milling, they becomes a very important source, especially if they are located in the urban areas. But unfortunately, the good news is that most of the crushing, grinding, and these machines, they are usually located away from the sources. So that kind of source is less, but yes, of course they do contribute. Then US EPA, United Nations Environmental Protection Agency, they defined solid road dust as solid particles that are generated by any mechanical processing of the materials. The last you see by natural forces, here they have defined more specifically like mechanical processing of materials, including crushing, grinding, rapid impact handling, denotation, and decryption of organic and inorganic materials such as rock, ore, and metal. So that process gives lots of dust aerosols. WHO have defined particles between 1 to 100 micrometer. So you can now imagine the situation. This was actually like TSP. Okay. So we discussed total suspended particulate matter, whose size was almost less than 100 micron. So in a way you can say that these TSPs, or most of the TSPs, they will be composed of the road dust kind of particles. Then Natural Geographical Society also has defined, but it is actually not a very scientific definition. Dust is a collection of microscopic particles of materials. It is heavy enough to be carried out by the winds. Dust can be made of pollens, bacteria, smoke, ice, salt crystal from ocean, small bits of dirt or rock, including sand. So these are the different sources, but these are the sources usually defined as a natural sources of the dust aerosol. So we don't discuss much here. We take mostly ISO, US EPA, and WHO guidelines, as well as the glossary of atmospheric chemistry terms. So this I talked about the road of the dust aerosols. And again, if you see here road dust, what are the natural sources? Soil and sands. So you have dust particles from the natural sources like soil erosion, and then desert and beaches, they can be there. And not only then beaches, they can be actually river, especially if the city is located very close to rivers. For example, Allahabad, Prayagraj, and then Varanasi, and then Kanpur cities, there could be actually some source, but we have discussed this one. We have carried out some research, and we found that generally river dust is not very significant source of urban dust particles. Then we have plants and tree debris like pollens, leaves, fragments, organic material that becomes pulverized, volcanic ash, of course this is actually natural source of aerosols. Then ocean spray we discussed, and then wildfire we have discussed in the previous slides. Okay. So you can see here not only this actually like here plant debris is there, there could be pollens on this one, and then on these roads, these actually in between the spaces that are there, dust particles will be embedded on that one, and when the vehicle moves, they will be actually surrounded, they will be getting some kinetic energy, and then they will be actually surrounded. And this is actually like kind of this picture shows that how actually different kind of from the rocks weathering, it can be source of natural aerosols. So anthropogenic sources, they mostly include like binocular emission we talked about, and then most of the time vehicular emissions are mostly defined in the terms of PM 2.5 and PM 10 and mostly PM 2.5. So, vehicular emission as such actually is not a part of aerosols if you are measuring PM 2.5 and PM 10, but when they are subjected to the deposited back on the earth surface on the roads especially, and during the vehicle movement they can be actually transported and they can be resuspended in the atmosphere. Tire and tire break of the tire, this is becoming another very significant source, especially from the heavy duty vehicles. These heavy duty vehicles, they contribute significantly because they are already having the load on the tires, the pressure is high, the temperature of the road is also contributing significantly. So, this tire can be burnt a little bit when especially when the tires becomes aged. Then construction and deposition activities, very important. Sand, cement and other debris from the construction site, they often get disposed nearby the roads. So, this is also another problem that in several areas you see that people are constructing their houses and some construction activities are going on. You will see lots of sand is deposited near the road, and sometimes suppose there are two vehicles that is coming on the way approaching each other, one has to give side, and sometimes they can be actually moving from the sand on the top of the sand. So, that sand gets actually disturbed, it can be actually carried forward to and can become a source of road dust. Then industrial activities like factories and industries located near the roads may emit particles that settle as dust particle. They may be deposited as a carbonaceous material, but later when they are deposited and resuspended, they becomes part of the dust aerosols. Agriculture practices like soil particles from the farming activities, particularly in road areas, and this is one of the important source of transboundary transport as well actually, because if the urban city is very close to the agriculture prone areas, the dust can come from there. And you can see that if the roads are not good and then they are not composed of very good quality roads, and you can see the thick layer of sand that is deposited on this one. Similarly, you can see here. So, this is a very important source of this. Okay. So, the mechanism by which the road dust are resuspended in the atmosphere, as we said, we discussed that size of the road dust is very important governing factor for resuspended of road dust. Surface creeping involves large particles that are larger than 0.5 millimeter in the diameter. These particles are too heavy for wind to lift, so they are dragged or rolled along the surface. So, this small bigger particles, they actually can be actually creeping, and during this process they can be broken down into smaller particles, and once these smaller particles are suspended in the atmosphere and winds can carry them away from these sources. Saltination refers to the movement of medium sized particles typically between 0.1 to 0.5 micrometer in diameter. These particles are, for example, this one. So, the particles that are actually between little bit smaller 0.1 to 0.5 millimeter, they can be actually transported from they can be uplifted from the winds and they can travel short distance and then they fall back to the ground. So, they actually fall back here, and then during this process part of these aerosols can be actually becoming smaller, they can broken down and these particles can then be resuspended. And then heavy metal, you can also have the particles that are actually enriched in the heavy metal, enriched particles from industries or transportation one, and whence they are deposited. So, you will see that heavy metal enriched particles that are there, they are deposited, and this is how we will see in the next lecture that how we differentiate between natural dust and then what you call road dust. So, resuspension, the third process is very important, that it involves the fine dust particles usually less than 0.1 millimeter. So, 0.1 millimeter means less than 100 micrometers actually. So, this becomes very important, and they can be actually these particles are light enough to be lifted and carrying out by the dips to a longer distance. So, you can see the smaller particles, they can move up in the atmosphere and they can be transported from there to longer distances. So, this is very important source. Okay, so with this one I think I have discussed about the importance of the urban road dust and how they are actually generated in the urban areas, what are the typical sizes, how we define road dust. In the coming lectures we will discuss that how these road dust can be differentiated from the natural dust aerosols, and then we will also discuss that the toxicity levels of natural dust aerosols and urban dust aerosols can be different. So, that we will discuss in the next lecture. So, thank you so much, take care and bye bye till then. Thank you.